Here we are, Maurice Fernandez with Hanna Tanajura, and we come together ahead of the fabulous astrology conference at Omega Institute, and that's upstate New York next October, October 3rd to 5th. And I'm here to have a conversation with Hanna, speak a little bit about who we are, and of course, what this conference is about. We're going to focus specifically on the themes that bring us together. Number one, why is this conference about the feminine archetypes in astrology? And then I'd like to introduce Hanna, who is really a wonderful astrologer. And I've seen her promise, a real gem who is only growing in capacity and in talent and visibility with her YouTube channel. And so it's a pleasure for me to have Hanna in as part of the faculty, but also to support younger astrologers who, deserve the visibility and can make a difference. And I want to pick your brain on the fact that you're starting your career as an astrologer in recent years, and it's very different from when I started, which was early 90s before the internet era, and it's different from those who came before me who were took on this astrology oath in the 70s and 60s. So tell us a little bit about yourself, first of all, and let's take it from there.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you, Maurice, for such a lovely introduction. Thank you for, co-creating this experience with me. It's really always such a blessing to be around you. You're such a infinite fountain of knowledge and wisdom. So it's really, really a privilege for me. And on that note, I hope it's okay to mention this, but I caught myself, now looking at the news, what's going on in the world. And then the first thing that comes to mind is like, I need to go to Maurice's group on Facebook, Evolutionary Skies, to see what he has posted about it, because you always bring, this deeper understanding and awareness of what's going on and what's happening. So I really wanted to honor all that you do for astrology and all you make astrology so accessible to all of us. So I just want to really honor
Thank
and
you. Thank you
yeah.
so much.
About me, yes, I was born and raised in Brazil. I moved to the States many years ago, so I've been here for pretty much half of my life. Astrology was not the plan. It was definitely not part of my plan. It really came at a time, now I know I was in the Neptunian void, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't know really what kind of um direction to take, especially, career wise. I was very, very lost. And the flow, the rivers literally, brought astrology to me. It was really, I kept asking myself, what do I want to learn? What do I want to learn? And I was going on so many websites of different schools and different programs. Should I get an MBA? Should I? No, so many ideas, and everything was a no until I was like, what do I really want to learn? It's like, it was in astrology. So,
I mean, just if I can share, you're born a Capricorn in the generation of Uranus, Neptune in Capricorn. So your sun is sandwiched between Uranus and Neptune, which, when I was actually starting to do astrology professionally during those years, um, I really was optimistic that wow, those who are born with this alignment will become the mainstream astrologers. Because, in our times, astrology was even more on the fringes. And so there was a promise that this generation born with the conjunction of Uranus Neptune would combine this, higher knowledge as a whole, not just astrology, but astrology also specifically, given that it brings kind of this science and spirituality together. And so here you are with your sun right between Uranus and Neptune. And as you said, you were led to do it. And the Capricorn, I suspect, will bring the structure and the grounding and the accessibility to vast knowledge. It's one thing to study astrology. What was the decision to become an astrologer? Like, what clicked? What made you do that, decide that?
As I was going through the journey of learning and studying, and I realized, it was like the first time I was realizing what the natal chart, really is, how much it holds, the language, the symbolism. Like, it started to open up all these doors of perception for me, understanding of my own life, my own circumstances, my own struggles, my own challenges. So it brought this such a deep and high perspective all at the same time, and especially with evolutionary astrology, because we're really speaking about so much more than just the here and now. Like, we're looking at the whole thread of our soul path. So it really blew my mind, but it wasn't just one moment. It was just kind of this realization. And I love being useful. So I found a way to be useful to people in a way that I think can be really meaningful and really significant.
And so let's talk about that. In my time, like I said, I also kind of accidentally became an astrologer. And that was 1992 when I did my first readings for money. It was before the internet, and so everything was more regional. People came to, our studio or office for readings. And very few of us really committed to being a full-time astrologer because it was not financially easy and sustainable. But then, the internet became accessible, available, and that really jump-started everything. But what we see today, at least what I can compare, is that there's so much going on, and it's almost like a point of saturation. A lot of content, which is wonderful, but also the risk of getting lost, and the risk also, I wonder, for you as a new professional, how does it feel to be marketing yourself, to make it as an astrologer today?
Yeah, I think what exactly what you said. I think the internet and how accessible astrology is, has it's a blessing and a curse, I think. It's easier to publish. It's easier to, put content out there, speak about astrology, because you could do it in so many different social media platforms. You can have your own, newsletter and have all your emails in there and then send it out. Like, there's so many tools that make it more accessible and easier. And at the same time, because it's more accessible and easier, there's so many voices, there's so many perspectives. And it's like, why should you listen to me? I take my time to whatever I'm creating. I'm making sure it's like verified and good and well done, and
Good Capricorn methods.
Capricorn.
Now, you're going to speak about some asteroids and then the Venus cycle. And you have shorter lecture as a newcomer, and yet these are super important themes. So, I'm going to unpack a little bit why I chose the to focus this conference on the feminine archetypes in astrology. But I was wondering how you feel that you fit into that. And what are you going to more specifically talk about?
I think we've reached a point in our history where we really need to, it's essential to connect with these feminine energies. And again, like really beyond gender. So the feminine way of being, right? The feminine way of existing here. So really,
And
nurturing mercy and generosity, Sorry, Maurice, I interrupted you.
yeah, no, I'm interrupting you. But that's an important point that you're making kind of by passing is we all have feminine, masculine energy in our charts. And there's a lot of controversy today, especially with kind of the evolution of, the questions, the social questions, the spiritual question. What is it to be a man? What is it to be a woman? What is it to be non-binary or transgender? And I think it's important to emphasize that from an astrological point of view, it doesn't take away the masculine, feminine energies. So the chart doesn't discern whether someone is born, male or female, and even non-binary. Basically, the chart is just showing what energies are applicable. And so a man can be born with a lot of female energy in his chart
Mhm.
and vice versa. What I often use as a term to discern that is the solar masculine and the lunar masculine, and the solar feminine and the lunar feminine. So by solar and lunar, I I emphasize the more extroverted energy of the masculine and the introverted energy of the feminine. So a woman can be solar and
Mhm.
a man can be lunar, which is very important to understand today. And there's a lot of debating in astrology, whether the moon is feminine. Why is it feminine and why Venus is feminine? And it's very layered. But I do feel like it's important as we become more complex beings and we become more in touch with those different layers of ourselves to discern masculine and feminine energies because they are not the same and they do need to be integrated in our charts, whatever gender we are. So that's a long rant on, something you said about, you know, understanding feminine, masculine beyond biological uh, sex and gender. How does that fit into your presentations?
I just want to say thank you for clarifying that, Maurice. This is actually a question I had for you, because I think a lot of people can automatically think of the word feminine women, masculine men, and thinking that this conference is just for women, which is, absolutely it's for everyone. So thank you for clarifying that and speaking about that. And I will be speaking about Pallas Athena the Asteroid. The talk is actually called Pallas Athena and the Women Who Changed the World, and also the Venus star points of 2026. So can I share a little bit about which one is
Without
about?
without giving it all away.
I'm actually
Yes.
gonna do the whole conference now. So just a little bit backstory to why I chose Pallas, because there are other, female asteroids. It's when I'm deeply inspired by great women, women who did things differently, women who challenged the status quo of the times, women who redefined what was possible and really like paved the way for me, for all of the other women. Um, artists, scientists, leaders, mystics, so I'm so inspired by them. And then so as I'm looking through the charts of all these women, I am seeing a strong Pallas. And I'm thinking, whoa, who is this? So and this is how I see Pallas as is like kind of a total badass, just a little story about Pallas. She's not born from the womb, she's born from the mind of her father, Zeus. And so she comes out perfectly formed. She has a golden helmet and she has the golden sandals. She's kind of like Wonder Woman before the comic books type of energy. So it's this embodiment of this warrior goddess and that fierceness, but also intelligence and vision. So, and how much that was in many ways not allowed to be expressed.
And Pallas is indeed very much a solar feminine.
Mhm.
I mean, like you said, she's born from the head of Jupiter or Zeus, and she is fierce and she's a warrior. And we can see, at least my, limited research, is that Pallas shows up in our chart wherever there's strategy and also war.
Mhm.
I mean, we look at October 7 events in between Palestinian and Israelis. Pallas was right there, and it was right there on the leader's natal chart. So we definitely see that she's, like you say, very present in the chart of women who defied the status quo and were bold enough to, you know, come forth, revolutionize, dare express their creativity, which is a form of battle as well. And so that's a great example of how the feminine energy is not only, the docile surrender, that there's a whole spectrum
Mhm.
within that female archetype. And that's what I think is fun exploring in this conference.
But you mentioned war, Marie, so who has really strong palace are war journalists, women,
Mm,
correspondents. So there's so many of them, who, for example, Christiana Mapur, she's a palace in Aries, opposite the moon Jupiter. She was I think she still is the CNN's chief
yeah, yeah.
international anchor, right? Incredibly brave woman. And she's not fighting the battle, right? She's not fighting the war, but she has that palace, the vision, right? And she is witnessing everything.
Well, there's a very uh, actual headlines now about a female photographer killed in Gaza, Fatma Hassouna, who, after Israel kind of blocked foreign press from documenting what's going on, she saw her role as documenting what's going on, and she even created a documentary that was accepted in the Cannes Festival coming up, and she was killed on April 16 with 10 people. And I just posted her chart on Evolutionary Skies. She's a Sun, Pallas conjunct in
Mhm.
Aries. She she died on her birthday and day
Wow.
after.
You know, of course the Venusian theme. So, you know, this activation of in our love lives, in our relationships, in our finances, in our own relationship with ourselves, right? The Taurus, our relationship with ourselves versus the Libra side, our relationship with others, and how this is such it's just such a sacred invitation, right? To um connect with this. And, you know, I would definitely be, you know, bring some ideas for rituals and ceremonies that we can do during this portal to connect in. And I also think, and of course, we can look at this in our personal lives, right? Our own personal relationships, our own flow with money. But this is also, I believe, such an opportunity to utilize this portal of love to bring more love into the world, you know, especially in these times of great global transition that we're in. You know, I think having these portals, these dates, these exact days and times where we can bring this as a healing medicine, and really radiate that love outward. So yeah, so the we can talk about Venus being our heart, but also I think the Venus star points being this the collective heart of humanity. So
And that's what the conference is about, because it is about coming together. It
mhm,
is about connection. And in a time where, you know, we're very isolated, we connect online, this conference is in person, in nature. It's retreat style. So those of you who've been there before know how magical Omega is. And you can also stay some extra time. You know, the conference ends around noon on the Sunday. So you can stay that afternoon and have massages. You know, there's a whole healing modalities that are available there. And even just meditate, just be in nature, because we are in the greenery of upstate New York, and that's going to be also the fall colors, you know, which are quite remarkable and usually dramatic at that time of year. So, you know, it is a time for personal nurturing, for community, and do, you know, take advantage of this, because there aren't many opportunities in our time to connect with your community and to do something like that together with celebration of astrology. So that brings another, you know, quality of the feminine, which is not just about learning and typing and writing, but also embodying,
mhm,
connecting, and ritual. You know, it's easier for us, organizers, to just say, let's simplify. Why do I take this on myself? You know, why go that extra mile to organize and then to make sure people can make it up there? And yet we do it because we see the value when we're there. There's magic. There is, you know, there's power and personal empowerment in being able to meet people. You know, working with Omega is both, you know, such an amazing opportunity, because this has been a place that for decades has invited some of the great minds, some of the great spiritual minds, you know, from the Buddhist bodhisattvas to philosophers, and astrology has only recently been integrated into this pantheon of spiritual seers and masters. And so there's a lot of strong energy just in the place itself because it has nurtured spirit for so many years.
Um, and I wanted to ask you about one of the topics that you're going to be talking about, that you're going to be exploring, which is the dwarf planets. And that's something that I am really, really looking forward to. Um, and I wanted to ask you why you picked this topic, and the dwarf planets being the planets beyond Jupiter, and they are, not
Beyond
named
Neptune.
beyond Neptune.
So a few things I'd like to kind of reply. Number one, there's a research quality to this in the sense that because these are trans-Neptunian bodies, they're very slow moving. They stay in a sign like Pluto or longer than Pluto. They are dwarf planets like Pluto. And so we're speaking about Haumea, Sedna, Eris, which is the only one named after a Greco-Roman deity. The other one, like you said, were named from other traditions. um, so it's hard to research them because they are so slow to transition and to move. So we don't have yet, so much perspective to look back. And even, some of the ephemeris are hard to find beyond 200-300 years. We want to look at historical events, especially, Sedna has a 11,000 year cycle.
Wow.
Now, this may seem like, why do we bother, right? But look at the orbit of Sedna. It it actually created its own new category within the dwarf planet because Sedna comes very close to the solar system and then exits it far beyond. And of course, we found out about Sedna when she was, right now, close to the sun. But she's going to then depart and be far away into the cosmos. So think about just that visual of how Sedna becomes a bridge between what is now completely unrealized realms, unrecognized realms of the cosmos. And she's bringing it back to the solar system and taking it out again to the far edges. So this is something we need to acknowledge because these planets made themselves aware of themselves to us. You know, there's a synchronicity in the fact that they were discovered now. Does that represent its own paradigm shift for humanity? So I'm, already, since I organized this conference, I'm already taking notes and doing a lot of research in preparation.
Going back to one of the things you said about the dwarf planets and the indigenous quality, and that, even that disconnection from the earth, right? Which is, so present in the indigenous cultures, was the connection with the earth and the elements and the primordial elements, all of that. So do you think that these, part of what the meanings and significance of the dwarf planets can be connected to collective ancestral wisdom, and also how to restore this, which I think we can call it a deep collective pain as well, that
You
separation.
know, I'm going to answer this in a very simple way. I'm going to show you the chart
Mm,
for the first Earth day. And this chart, as you can see, has the dwarf planet Haumea, which is a mother goddess of Hawaii, the kind of great mother of the whole pantheon of Hawaiian deities. She's right on the south node of Earth Day in Virgo. And Sedna had just moved into Taurus, and the sun is conjunct Sedna in Taurus for Earth Day. And so this captures the importance of these planets, because you would look at Earth Day, the chart, and you would say, yeah, of course, it's the sun's in Taurus and it's Earth, and wow, that's a great synchronicity. But then, wow, there's more. There are two powerful goddesses that are holding these access points, these kind of central um, strategic points of the conjunction to the sun and the nodal axis, to bring us back to the indigenous ways of honoring the planet. Because the difference between female spirituality and male spirituality, both relevant, and yet one more emphasized than the other, is that through female spirituality, we see the connection with Earth is not only about, oh, we need to help, the whales and protect the trees. And it's about understanding that everything is conscious. Part of what was so precious and needs to be further recovered from indigenous cultures across the planet. You go to Australia, to the Aboriginal, you go to South Africa, to the San, Khoisan people, you go to Hawaii, it's the same understanding that nature is conscious, that trees are not just things, they are conscious beings, and that animals are contributing not only to the ecosystem, but they have a role in the evolution of consciousness. And what was so magical about the indigenous culture is that they not only recognize that, but once they recognize that, they could communicate with nature.
Mm.
They could be part of nature. So there's an aspect here of not being superior to, but part of. But there's also something that is being established when you understand that a tree is your counterpart, that you establish a rapport that is going to be very different, but also much deeper, very precious, and so much knowledge can be revealed once you establish that communication. So today, most of our spiritual religious traditions put humans above nature. And to be fair to that, we look at astrology, and there is indeed a role in our in humanity being able to be so creative, to be able to stand on our own 2 feet and have our brains, the highest organ that reaches up to the sky. So there are definitely very unique qualities to humanity that we should not trivialize. In astrology, the sign of Aquarius represents the human, and it's opposing the sign of Leo, which has to do with the lion. And so it's not a coincidence that the lions and humans are on top of the food chain, and they are kind of on the same axis, because both of them are custodians of life. And so when and if we were to see humans being so skilled and capable and, creative and develop science, that does not mean exploitation of nature, entitlement towards nature, but rather supporting, being, in service to. So if you want to be on top of the pyramid, fine. Just know that means you have greater responsibility, not greater privilege. That is kind of what needs to be recalibrated in our consciousness, is that the better, the higher you are, the more you have to give. So that answers, the indigenous connection and the fact that astronomers who know nothing about astrology or don't want to know anything about astrology for the most part are, synchronistically named these new planets after the indigenous cultures. Haumea is a Hawaiian goddess, Sedna is an Inuit goddess, and Eris is a Greco-Roman goddess who is also, a force to be reckoned with. One last bit is that very recently, these two planets have changed signs. So Haumea has just moved recently into Scorpio, and Sedna has just recently moved into Gemini. And we know that they're so slow moving that every kind of new ingress brings a new dawn, a new era. So exploring those new archetypes in these new signs will give us perspective. Just like, Sedna I moved into Taurus in 68 or 69. And so that was the beginning of Earth Day, 1970. And, she's been in Taurus all along, only now moving into Gemini. And so here we are, looking ahead into a new paradigm.
And that actually takes me to one, I believe, really important question, especially coming from you who've seen so much, you've seen so many cycles, you've been, working with astrology for so long. And of course, deepen your own body of knowledge with Pluto and Aquarius for the next 19 years, Aquarius being ruling astrology and the astrology field, and Pluto really bringing that deep transformational work and change, and at worst really really revealing all the darkness and the shadows. So I would love to hear what your predictions are in terms of the potentials of astrology, especially evolutionary astrology, but also the challenges and how we as astrologers, what we need to be aware of for this, these next few years, these many, like 2019 years.
Yep, agreed. There are several factors to look, into the different milestone for astrology. Late astrologer Robert Blaschke, made this comment that every time Uranus is conjunct the nodal axis, there's some kind of breakthrough in the world of astrology, a new movement, and so forth. And we saw that, when Uranus was in Scorpio on the North Node in the 70s, the whole psychological astrology, karmic astrology really took off. And we, all the books, and evolutionary astrology was actually born from that movement in the 70s by Jeff Green and Stephen Forrest. And then, in Capricorn, in the early 90s, saw a revival of traditional astrology. So that, and in the 80s, when Uranus was on the South Node in Sagittarius, that's when all the big astrology conferences occurred. You had NORWAC begin and UAC, United Astrology Conference. So suddenly, astrologers came together as a community to teach, not just in their living room, but in larger scale. And that was the Uranus nodes in Sagittarius. And, we can keep going like that. And so Uranus, Aquarius definitely relate to the development of astrology in one way or another. And as you say, Pluto needs to expose the shadows. It's part of the process of growth. You need to face the inconvenient truth. You need to look at the limitations. And there are several things that need to happen. Now, you mentioned prediction. I don't know exactly if it's a prediction, but more about, what could come up. That Pluto in Aquarius is now in a sextile with Neptune and trine Uranus. So there is a lot of new ideas coming in. And I think that will contribute to new research. But if we speak about what needs to happen for our community, for our practice to grow in a healthy way, I will say, number one, to look at the science of astrology more. We talked about the indigenous ways, and that means incorporating more astronomy, looking up at the sky, understanding cycles on a scientific way as much as we look at it from a symbolic way. So I like to combine astronomy with myth, because there's a lot of myth in the sky. The names of these planets, of these constellations, are all about myth. So astronomy is intimately connected with myth, and that's, again, spirit and science interplay. And I think today, more and more quantitative research is spearheaded by people like Robert Curry, who are encouraging statistical research. So, if we say, oh, Mercury retrograde is not good for buying new things, let's look at this statistically. Because unfortunately, and it's natural, but it's unfortunate that we tend to just take on what our teachers say without always testing the knowledge. And we kind of repeat what, standing on the shoulders of giants, yes, but as a new generation, we constantly need to test those facts, because there's a lot of, it's enough that a mistake is made at some point. If we don't do statistical research, that mistake is going to repeat, and it becomes its own myth. I speak about Mercury retrograde because it's becoming such a fad. And, I signed so many contracts and I bought so many important things during Mercury retrograde that were extremely successful. And so, does it hold statistically that you shouldn't do those things during Mercury retrograde, or are we getting it wrong? And that's true for anything. Is Saturn really causing, self-esteem issues? Oh, we can see that people born with Saturn on their ascendant, tend to have to reflect much deeper, have to, slow down their course. So we can verify our knowledge. And I think that can be a great way to use this Pluto in Aquarius trine Uranus in Gemini, because it brings the science into astrology without, choking the creativity, without blocking in the intuition. There's always that fear that, oh, if we become too scientific, it's gonna kill the goddess. It's gonna kill the intuitive. It's gonna make it so brainy. And no, it's about balance. It's about health. And then the other thing that needs to happen is, because astrology is growing and so forth, we need standards.
Mm.
And if we don't do it proactively, astrologers in our community, it's going to be imposed on us. So we see more and more people doing astrology without enough rigor in their practice and training. And we see the risk of damage. When somebody tells you you're never going to have kids because Saturn's doing, a square to your whatever, dangerous. This can lead to not just harm, but lawsuits. And imagine that if there's really critical incident happening, authorities are going to step in. We live now in a bubble. Nobody pays attention to us. But the bigger we become, the more risk we take, the more visible we are and more exposed to scrutiny.
Right.
So if we don't handle our growth responsibly, it can lead to a backlash. It can lead to accidents that then invite, the authorities to either shut down astrology or to try to control it. And we know that there's not a lot of love for people who don't understand astrology. Religious people tend to see it as, worshiping of false gods. And scientists tend to see it as pseudoscience. So there are people out there who have interest in shutting us down.
Yeah, great point. I actually had recently a client who she is a Pluto sun, and she had her first astrology reading in her 20s. She's in her 60s now. And the astrologer told her in a very direct way, you're going to have kids and they will die, or one of
Oh
them.
my God.
And I got so angry because, I spent so much of my time to really learn, to test, to verify, to properly use, to work with integrity, responsibility, and heart and compassion. It's like so much of my life force goes into it. And then to hear that with one sentence, you can create so much damage, which it did, because it really was a curse her whole life, pretty much. She's been living under this awful prophecy, which, especially as evolutionary astrologers, we know the potential and the meanings and the intentions of a Pluto sun, and so damaging. So I appreciate you saying that, Maurice. And then on the flip side, what should people who are becoming interested in astrology and maybe don't want to necessarily learn in depth, but want to have that as a tool in their own journey, what do you think they should be aware of and mindful of as consumers of astrology?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about kids, and for most of us, our kids are our most precious thing. Knowledge is powerful. Because it's powerful, it can also be misused. Now, I go on social media and some of these astrology groups, and I see somebody who loves astrology, post about their kids, and post the chart of their children online and asks to amateurs, people who know a little bit of astrology, ask,
Yeah.
oh, my child doesn't socialize easily. What's going on in his chart? So we're not talking about a private consultation with a professional. We're talking about exposing something so personal, vulnerable, not only your own child, but something sensitive about your child to to a whole crowd who, for the most part, mean very well. They want to help. But then they throw these tidbits, oh, his moon is square Pluto. And no wonder, he can't socialize. And even things like you should look at yourself as a mom, because we see that his moon is afflicted. And that cannot end well. That is recipe for derailing astrology, misusing it. So I don't know what to do. I hope the big organizations, uh, can help educate, bring more awareness about positive uses. But I think there's something about that Pluto in Aquarius that may bring scrutiny and attention
Mhm.
to the right use. As far as I'm concerned, we're all very happy that astrology is out there and that more people benefit from its virtues. But like anything, it takes a process to become a psychologist. It takes a process to become a doctor. You can't just wear that badge without proper training. And and so it's a bit of the Wild West.
Mhm.
Now, if we speak about Pluto in Aquarius, at the tail end of, I mean, the last third of it in 2032, we're going to have a Uranus Saturn conjunction in Gemini.
Gemini, yeah.
So you're born during that generation, and it's going to repeat. And that is going to be, to me, a very important milestone in the educational, Gemini educational structuring of astrology. Hopefully, you know, provide good boundaries and a better system.
A big test. Another thing too that I found is that there's a lot of people charging very little money. And I think that also brings a little lack of credibility, because I've had some people come to me and ask, oh, why is your price so high? I just paid, 25 for a reading. And I think the value is also part of the credibility of good
I
work,
mean, when I speak about these examples online, it's free,
right?
right? So people don't want to invest in a proper reading, and they're asking these super personal, delicate questions because it's free, and
Mhm.
they end up, possibly causing damage. I mean, not them causing the damage, but, eh, you know, being exposed in an unhealthy way. People need to understand that you need to invest in good service.
Mhm.
It's worth the money. You're going to get, skilled, trained, and qualified guidance, hopefully.
Absolutely. And I have one last question for you, Maurice. In the midst of all that, I actually have many questions, but for the sake of time, I'll keep it to one more. After so many years, what keeps you inspired? What keeps you going? What keeps you, um, yeah, inspired, motivated?
Uh, yeah, I, it's a study of life. So learning astrology is a constant peeling of layer. I think what motivates me is that I keep learning.
Mm.
And every client, every presentation, comes with new aha moments for me, not just for the audience. And so that kind of stimulates me. I am definitely engaged in this, and I believe in everything that I do. So I'm in it. And I think that keeps my fuel burning. So I think the aspect of discovery is very rewarding. And also, you know, being able to help, being able to make a difference in other people's lives in ways that other modalities often cannot. Because the perspective we have through this tool, medicine doesn't have it, psychologists don't have it, body workers don't have it. So we offer something that is incredibly unique and can be that missing piece of a puzzle in a person's life. And then, of course, we can encourage them to get a massage and to get to unpack some things with a psychologist. So it's good to cross-pollinate that way for a holistic approach.
Mm.
And so everyone, October, mark your calendars. Upstate New York, you land usually in New York City, and you can take the train upstate. It's about a 2-hour ride to a city, a small town called Rhinebeck. And from there, the Omega shuttles can pick you up. So it's going to be fabulous. It's going to be rewarding. It's going to be heartwarming. It is a celebration of spirit and a meeting of hearts. And the food is great. And Hanna will be there.
Can't wait. Can't wait. Thank you. Thank you so much, Maurice, for putting this together, creating this experience for all of us. Thank you for the preciousness of your time, and as always, sharing so much wisdom. And I'm so looking forward to Omega and to really be around, like I mentioned, these masters and Anne Ortley and Lynn Bell and Nadia Shaw and you, of course. It's really such an honor, and it's such a privilege for me. And I asked you about your inspiration. Like, this is inspiring me, so to keep going and to keep putting I end my day, I always end my day with a phrase, like a question to myself, which is, did I put good food into life today? And if I get a yes, I'm like, okay, then it was a day well spent. And that to me, it's what this is at the end of the day, is just putting really good nutrition into life, into the world. So thank you
Absolutely.
for
I mean,
organizing this.
there's so much struggle.
Yeah.
We need to bring light. Simple. Thank you, Hanna. Thank you for your time. And yeah, a few months to go.